Welcome and thank you for joining me. This is Laurie of Laurie's Heirloom Sewing. I am working on the little Valentine heart projects that I had said that I would be working on, but my whole week has just been kind of crazy. We had a furniture delivery that we weren't really expecting as early as we had it. So that kind of cut into some of my time yesterday, and I didn't get the video that I did yesterday uploaded, and I'm kind of ahead, but I'm kind of behind, and I'll try to see if I can't get that to make sense in just a minute. So, what I've done so far, and by ahead, that's kind of what I mean. I actually had filmed this part, but then I had to discard that video because of some other technical issues that I was having. So right now where we are is we have our two pieces of fabric cut and prepped for sewing, and where we are at that stage is we have outer fabric, which is this little cotton print, and our lining fabric, which is the pink striped seersucker that we have applied a fusible fleece to. And you'll notice that the fusible fleece that has been applied is not all the way to the edges. We've got some space there for a seam. Okay, so the next step, and we're going to do that to both sides. So I have a front and a back, or a front and a lining piece, or an outer piece and a lining piece, cut twice each one, is we're going to measure down from this little divot on the heart right here. So where the two sides of the heart come together in the center, we're going to measure down about an inch. So we need to line up both pieces of our fabric, the outside piece and the lining piece. And actually on the lining piece really is the side that we want to measure on. We're going to measure down about an inch. And I have a heat erase pen. I'm just going to kind of make a mark there. Okay. And then we're going to draw a line as straight as we can from that mark. So I know I'm on a white mark there. And, okay. And yep, okay, so I'm hitting the same spot on my fabric. Excuse me, I have such a tickle in my throat today. Okay. So the whole point of this line right here is we're going to stitch just to that line on both sides of the bag. And I'm going to go ahead, I want to kind of pin these two together to make sure they're going to stay. And that I like where that is. So you really only have to mark this, but then you need to put these right sides together and kind of make sure that that little point is precisely lined up on both the lining and the outer fabric. And you don't have to pin down here because we're only going to be stitching on the top, the top portion of our project. course, once you get that stitched, then you wouldn't want to stitch down here anyway, and I'll show you why in a minute. Okay. All right, and we're going to stitch it from the side where we drew the line, because we need to be able to see that line. I also need to load my machine with thread. I have a red in my bobbin, and I like that. Considering it is a Valentine project, I love the fact that that's red, and I think I'll load my needle with a pretty pink. I'm using a Gutermann 100% polyester. I've had it for a long time. Over 20 years. I used to sell this in my shop, and I won't lie, it's pretty old. So, all right, is that going off? That's going counterclockwise, which is the way it needs to go off of the needle. I need to lift my needle lift up. I need to cut my thread because it's been so raggedy, and as everybody who watches me knows, I never moisten the end of my thread when I'm threading a needle on my sewing machine, and all I do is just run my fingers down my sewing machine needle. I'm checking for burrs or any abnormalities in that needle, and I'm also removing static, which will allow my thread to just go right on in. I can't see very well. I have very bad eyes. I have ever since I was in kindergarten. I've had to wear glasses. So I'm not seeing that. I just kind of aim for the direction I know that's supposed to go. And if there's no static and my thread isn't whipping all over the place because, you know, the static is preventing it from being threaded, then I feel pretty good. Okay, I'm going to use the foot on my sewing machine, and you can see I pinned this on the wrong side, but that's okay, I'll just be careful. I'm going to use the foot on my sewing machine as the seam allowance guide, and I'm starting right on that line that I drew. I'm going to put my machine in needle down. The default is 2.5 on my sewing machine. That's my stitch length. And I'm just going to gently, well, this is not good. Yeah, I think I may have, of course, I'm in a hurry, and that's why this is happening. Okay, I'm going to check. Feels like the, no, it's perfect. Okay. Not exactly sure why the bobbin thread did that, but I'll figure it out. Oh, ouch. I'm sure it has to do with tension. It almost always does. Or it is lint. Oh, these scissors are just awful. Goodness me. Alright, so I need to remove every bit of the thread that just got applied and tangled. The last time I used my sewing machine was at a class, so that's kind of weird. I don't see any lint because I did clean it before, so we'll try that again, and then if this doesn't work, I will have to take my machine in for some maintenance and use a different sewing machine. so far so good. Okay, when you get to the center where the little divot is for your heart, I would really hold the fabric together and go slow. Get to that center point, lift your presser foot, turn your machine a quarter turn, and take 2 stitches. 1, 2. Then lift your presser foot and then turn and continue sewing. And I know you know, but when you get to that line, stop sewing. Okay? And make sure you have sharp scissors. Unlike me, who is like not prepared. Okay. There we go. I was actually using these to cut out my parchment paper. They are not fabric scissors, they're craft scissors. And I said craft, not what you think I said. Okay, so now what we need to do, I know we measured, but we need to use this as our guide. So flip it over. Don't do any pressing or you'll lose that line if you used a heat erase, and you don't want to lose the line yet. So I'm not going to use that piece. I'm going to use this piece and fold this down along that line. Okay. Make sure that you're on the line, because that's where you sewed. It's not where you intended to sew, it's where you actually sewed. So that's why I do it this way. And then I'm pinning that down, I'm pinning it in place, and I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side of the heart. I'm going to pin it down, and then I'm going to, just because I need to, I'm going to put a pin right in the center. You can also do this with clips across the top. I have got to move this desk. It's driving me out of my mind. Oh, I had it situated on the floor so that it wouldn't rock back and forth like that, and I'm going to have to redo it since we put the lights up. Okay, so now you've got this, and you can use this as your guide. Make sure that the whole entire heart is lined up. And I'm just going to say, I recommend that you do it after you sew. Because as I said, it's not where you intended to sew that you're marking. It's where you actually sewed that you're marking. So now you have absolutely the spot that you can mark. And I'm looking at that line where my stitching started. Okay, and then I can take my ruler and draw across. And as you can see, it's not straight, because now my lines are going to be kind of off kilter, which that's fine. It's fine for me. It may not be fine for you. It doesn't bother me. Okay, so now I have the two right sides together. And again, I'm going to pin just the top part. I will have to mark where I can see this on the correct side of my, okay, like that. Okay, line up your raw edges. Thread's just deciding to grab a hold of me. That's fine. Okay. And line up your marking exactly, because that is going to be very important in the process of making the lining fit into the bag. Otherwise, you're just going to have a big mess on your hands. It's got to be perfect right there. Or as close to perfect as one can make it. So you might have to pin and then repin and realign. Okay, and that is perfectly lined up, exactly where I wanted it to be. Okay. All right. So now we're going to do the exact same thing to this side that we did to this side. Sew that up. I'm using the side of my presser foot as my seam allowance, and I am putting the needle right where I drew the line. One thing to remember when you get to this little point, this little divot where the heart comes to a point, is you want to get there, take 2 stitches across like this, 1, 2, and then reposition your presser foot again. As long as that's lined up, I'm okay. All right. Cut your thread and flip it over, because there might be, there's some spots where I missed. And that's probably true on this side as well. So we're going to clean that up. I'm going to go flip it over. Now that I have my stitching line, I know exactly where I need to restitch. Again, I'm going to get to that little point, 1, 2, and then do that again. Now, because we've got an outer curve, what we need to do before we do anything else is we need to grade or trim down the excess fabric. So I'm doing that. I have some nice sharp scissors. If you grade your seam allowance on an outer curve, in other words, a curve that goes to the outside, not to the inside, that will help the that bump out to lay nice and flat when you turn it to the proper side. But you also can clip into it. So what I'm doing is I'm just kind of grading out some of that excess fabric, and it's really, really okay to do that on this project because we have 2 lines of sewing. When I do home dec type sewing or this type of project, I almost always do 2 lines of stitching. All right, I just need to make sure that I'm good. Yes, okay. All right. So what we will be doing is just opening this up like this. We're not going to try to pull these out yet. We're just going to open it up to that line of stitching. So we'll do that on both sides. I need to do a second row of stitching on this one, I believe. Nope, this one is perfect. So I'm not going to worry about this, just to save some time. This should be just fine. I will grade this. And you actually can clip into the little divot with your scissors. Don't clip your stitches. If you do, you'll have to restitch. Okay. So we're just trimming out excess fabric. We're making sure we're not cutting into our stitching. And actually grading a seam allowance is where you cut just one of the pieces of the fabric, not both. Okay, so that's been clipped, that's been cut out. All right, so now we're going to flip this way. We don't want to go past our line of stitching, so don't push it past that one stitch right there. Okay. Then we'll flip this onto the top of this and match up those seams. So where the print fabric meets the stripe fabric, we're just going to match up that seam, and we're going to pin so that they stay together. And the number one thing to remember here is you want to make sure that you start stitching right where you left off stitching. You don't want to go over that. You don't want to go backwards, and if you miss it, you'll have a little hole or an open space, so you want to be very careful about where you start stitching. Okay. Now I have decided, I don't know. I'm sort of torn. I want to put like a little key ring or something on the outside, but this little project, I don't know, it just maybe doesn't need that additional part. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. I'm so used to super long pins. It's weird when I run across one that's not. Okay. So just pin, pin, pin. Try to keep everything lined up. kind of skewed off here. I don't know what's going on. Let's just start that over. Sometimes projects work and sometimes projects don't work. And I have learned that when that happens, you just walk away, take a deep breath, and start over. My hope is that I did not distort my fabric, but I have a feeling that might be what has happened here, because this is bigger than it should be. So that's probably what happened. When I pressed the seersucker, I may have created one piece that's bigger than the other piece. But because seersucker has that lovely give, I'm going to try to make it work. And that's what we do in the crafting world. We just try to make it work. There we go. Okay. There is a bit of excess on the other side. Ouch, on the other side. So, my next plan of attack is to press. Yeah, okay. There we go. Lots and lots of give in this fabric. Oh, that's perfect. Okay. Yep. Now it's decided to play fair and lay down flat like it should. Ish. Yeah. So that's, to me, that is clearly what happened. I had one piece of fabric that I pressed and one piece of fabric that I ironed on this project. So the one that I ironed is slightly bigger than the one that I pressed, and that is why I'm having the fabric issue on the seersucker. So let's see. I don't appear to be having that problem with the cotton fabric. That seems to be working out as it should. Okay, so on your lining side, I would mark an area, down close to the bottom edge, that you're going to leave open. Probably about the size of your hand. You might want to mark it on both sides just in case you end up stitching from the other side. And that's where we're going to turn this through. Okay. We don't want to do that on our main outer fabric, because then we'd have to be especially careful in the process of stitching it closed. If we do it on the lining part that's on the inside, then we can just use the sewing machine if that's the way we choose to do that. A lot of you like to do that stitching by hand. I totally get it. When I was younger, I used to adore hand stitching, but with my ever decreasing ability to see, even with my glasses, and for a long time glasses and contacts, I've decided that machine sewing is probably the best option for me. Okay, so now we're going to start stitching at the precise point that we stopped stitching on this right here. I need to flip this over because my pins are on this side, and I really need to look for the lines that I marked. See the black line right there? That's where I need to start sewing. Make sure everything is flipped the proper way. Okay, perfect. And this time I'm going to start slightly past that point because I want to do a lock stitch. So I'm going to stitch forward 2 stitches, 1, 2, back 1, 2, forward. I think that was 3, but I'm not quite to that line yet. There we go. Okay, now I can move forward as normal and sort of ease my fabric in as I go, since I'm having, yeah, okay, that looks good. Okay, that's where I'm going to leave it open, okay. I'm going to backstitch to lock my stitches at the opening, and I'll do that on this side as well. Okay. Now on the bottom part, I'm just going to stitch twice. 1, 2, 3. Oh. Well, look at that. I think I did 4. I'll just leave it there. And then turn. Go up. And we may end up doing another row of stitches on this outer bag part. We'll see. We'll see how I feel about it. I have been known to change my mind many times. Okay. Tug this over. Okay, I'm coming up to where that second side of the stitching is, and my seams are meeting up beautifully. I'm just going to sew and then stop and then back up and then go forward. Okay. I'm going to trim that and trim this. Okay. Now I'm going to flip and do the exact same thing to the outer lining portion, the outer portion of my bag. I need to also trim the threads at the opening that I left for turning purposes. Okay. I see a little section here I don't like. It slid, and I want that to be straight. So I'm going to redo this section right here. There we go. And again, that's the lining, so we're okay. Now I'm just going to trim in along the bump out on the heart, on the part that I just sewed. I don't need to do that down here. This is basically straight, but up here I need to kind of, I want this to turn pretty. So I need to trim, just cut into but not through my stitching. I don't mean into my stitching line without cutting through it. So I don't want to harm the integrity of my stitching, but I want my fabric to be able to spread out pretty. Okay, now I'm going to flip this section this direction and do the exact same thing around the outer portion of the heart where my fabric is. I need to again make sure that I am starting my stitching right at that seam. I don't want a pucker and I don't want a an open spot. So fold it back. And of course, you know, if that happens when you're sewing and you see, just, you know, use your seam ripper to open up the stitches. It'll be fine. Okay, put that down and start sewing. we don't need to leave an opening on the outer fabric. I'm trying to mimic exactly what I did on this side. We'll see. Make sure that the heart pieces, the top part of that heart, are both facing toward the back and the seam is lined up when you're coming around that final top part of the heart. Make sure you caught all your fabric. I see another little spot that I want to reinforce with a little extra stitching right here.